Hi, my name is Andrew Duncan. In today's presentation, I will be discussing my experience with the data action model that I used in my assessment and data literacy class this semester. The data action model details how teachers can collect student data and plan for future instruction based on said data. In this class, I worked with a PLC or Professional Learning Community team to move through the data action model. First, we gathered and reviewed data. We then identified gaps and goals for our students. Next, we branched off on our own to create a specific data action plan and receive feedback from our mentor teachers on our individual data action plans. I then revised my data action plan and reflected upon my experience with the data action model. Throughout the semester, I worked with 5th grade students in vocabulary instruction. When gathering data, I considered their age, proficiency level, class participation, and performance, and relevant demographic data. Data Meeting 1 was the first time that I met with my professional learning community team. We were able to collect data regarding vocabulary assessments, which is why we chose that subject area to focus on. We reviewed vocabulary assessment scores and worked on a notice and wonder sheet to interpret the scores and data. We then drafted exploratory questions to focus on throughout the data action model. Here are the notices that we compiled, one of which being that the assessment we were reviewing took place at the beginning of the school year, before much instruction took place. Here are the wonders that we compiled, one of which being if the students took this assessment again with no review, would they perform as well? Here I have the exploratory questions that we created based upon the data and our notice and wonder sheet. The exploratory question that we chose to focus on the most throughout the data action model is, what instructional strategies do our mentor teachers implement into the classroom environment for students to score 80% or above on vocabulary assessments? Additionally, when students consistently score 80% or above on vocabulary assessments, how do our mentor teachers increase the difficulty of these assessments? In the next data meeting, we triangulated additional data. We focused on collecting artifacts and assessments to determine whether they demonstrated learning gaps or instructional gaps. We collected student work samples, teacher lesson plans, and test data so we could have as much information to base our future plans on as possible. This is the document that we used to track our information at this point in the data action model. It helped us understand the importance of each type of data that we collected, and we could more easily see what each piece of data represented regarding learning gaps and instructional gaps. In the third data meeting, we used the learning gaps and instructional gaps to create SMART goals for the students. SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Here I have the exploratory question that was chosen earlier, as well as the chosen learning gap. The learning gap we identified is in vocabulary, so our method to assess said learning gap is explicit vocabulary instruction. We then combined our learning gap and instructional method to create a SMART goal for the students. The goal is for 80% of students to achieve at least 16 out of 20 on a vocabulary quiz that is administered through Google Classroom. Before branching off on my own, I had one more meeting with my professional learning community team. We worked together to create a data action plan which we could use to help our students achieve the SMART goal. The data action plan contained instructional tactics and methods, who would implement the tactics, the frequency, the completion date, and verifying artifacts to assess whether the methods were actually helping the students. This is the data action model that we created. We decided upon some research-based instructional tactics to assist in vocabulary acquisition and understanding. These strategies were student-friendly definitions, vocabulary notebooks, and multiple exposures to vocabulary terms. I then talked to my mentor teacher and gained feedback from her on my data action plan. This feedback was then used to revise my plan so that it would be the best suit for the students. I chose to revise the student-friendly definitions and multiple exposures to vocabulary words tactics. The students could work with the teacher to create definitions so they are more meaningful to the students. They could also be exposed to vocabulary terms through reading texts, which would allow them to see the words in context. The final step in the data action model was reflecting on the process to determine what I thought went well and what I could still improve upon. I thought I did a good job identifying learning gaps and instructional gaps, collaborating with my professional learning community team, and creating meaningful SMART goals. I could still use some practice with making instructional decisions based upon assessment results and choosing effective follow-up activities. I would also like to learn more about creating reports about student learning. That wraps up my experience with the data action model. It truly is a great tool for teachers to use to identify where students are struggling and to figure out how to assist students in their learning processes. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.